All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session. I'm calling this Sparking a New Career Path, and my name is Emma Twersky. I'm currently a developer relations engineer at Google, and today I want to talk about sort of how I found the career path that I'm on, and maybe sort of build in how I've brought some of the passions I have outside of work into my career. And I sort of have two big goals for this talk. The first is going to be to challenge the boundaries of what we traditionally think of when we think of what a career in technology can be. And the next one is challenging how we think about leveraging the skills that we have outside of work, especially from the viewpoint of diversity, and how we can bring those into leveraging them within our career. So to do that, I'm going to start with some big disclaimers. Obviously, all of this is very specific to the time we're in. A lot of this happened because of the 2020 that I think we all agree we had. And so with that, let's start with some big caveats. So the first is the caveat of career progress, right? I am probably, admittedly, somewhere between 10 and 50% of the way through my career, depending on if I get the goat farm I strive to have one day. But I felt like I was always going to these conferences and seeing these speakers at places like Grace Hopper and other wonderful conferences out there, where I would listen to VPs of these big technology companies talk about success and how they had gotten to where they are. And I felt like I wanted to hear from someone who maybe was a little bit closer to myself. And so that's what I'm hoping to do here. But I will say I'm early on in this journey and I'm not sure what's left for me. The next thing is, by nature, I feel like I always like to have a caveat on career stories, right? So I'm telling you my story, and something that early on in my career I was really frustrated with was this idea that I would go out and do an informational interview, and if I emulated and did those exact things and didn't see the same results, I would get really frustrated, right? So I think instead of putting people on pedestals of saying, okay, this is this career story, this is what I must do to be successful, it's more about learning about some of the things that happened along the way and maybe seeing how we can incorporate those into our life. And with that said, I've already said success a couple times, but I just want to have a caveat on success, right? So I think we all can define success differently, and a lot of what a successful career is defining what success looks like to you. And I think a lot of what I have looked at in the last couple of years is what I even want to do to be successful and what I think that means for me personally. So with that said, I'm going to start my story with a once upon a 2020. So like I said, 2020 is probably a year a lot of people don't want to repeat. I will say 2020 was a pretty great year for me professionally and a pretty terrible year personally. And so a lot of this was done under the veil of a mask, right? Whether or not it's a fashion mask. A lot of this has to do with that, right? And so while I was in quarantine, I was really reflecting on the fact that I thought technology was really cool, right? Like I was happy with being in engineering, and I felt like I had chosen this really cool path because technology was cool, right? We were still able to connect with one another. I felt like I was like this really cool person on my computer, like doing really cool things and making the world like a better place. But I didn't necessarily like the software engineering part of it, or I didn't like only software engineering. I felt like I wanted a little bit more control over what I was engineering on. But there were some things that I really did like. And so a lot of that had to do with, at the time, I was working as an Android engineer. And specifically, I was doing a lot of really cool stuff with accessibility. And I really liked feeling like I was helping people and I was making a difference, right? I was using technology in like this cool ether space to hopefully make a difference for somebody, make life easier. And I felt like I was having an impact. But I really felt like I also wanted to try new things. And so the first sort of story point I have is pursuing sparks of passion, right? So I had reached a place where I felt like I could be excited about other things and I wanted to try those things, but I was really scared to take that jump, right? And so I think a lot of that has to do with this idea, right, that in my mind, I felt like I already had to be good at it. And I think this is the biggest misnomer in tech, that if you walk away from this with anything, It's that you don't already have to be good at the thing, right? So if we look at generational like expectations, right? I think computer science is one of those things where the college I went to, the biggest statistic for the reason that there was diversity issues in those CS 101 classes is this idea that you already had to be an expert or you already had to know how to code to enter into CS 101, which is ridiculous, right? There's not 100 classes before a 101 course. That's what the 101 course is supposed to do. And so I felt like I had carried that into my professional life, and I felt like, okay, I knew accessibility, I knew Android development, and so I had to do this. And I really wanted to walk away from that and pursue that spark. So with that said, outside of work, what I was doing was a lot of art, right? That's what I felt like I was traveling for. That's what brought me joy. That's what sparked joy. I just really enjoyed the visual side of things, and I brought that into technology a little bit because I was working on visual UI, UX stuff, but I wasn't necessarily fully in that space I wanted to be. And I was also living in a really cool place, right? I was living like a mile away from the Smithsonian Museums in DC. At the time, I was also in the World Art History program through the Smithsonian Museums. So I was trying to pursue that art stuff, but I saw myself as in these two separate tracks where there was like tech Emma and there was art Emma. And I felt like I needed to figure out a way to overlap them. And so at the time, I saw a TikTok, as probably a lot of us have, of this idea of overlapping the different parts of ourselves and finding a place where we can live with having a passion for the thing we're doing, having skill in it, and also there being a demand, right? And so I felt like I was like floating maybe in this like passion space with art and this skill space with tech, and I couldn't figure out a way to like move myself to the bottom right into this like demand world. And a lot of the stuff I was looking at the time was like experiential art, right? So you have Random International's Rain Room in LA, and I think it's toured a couple other places, but this idea that you walk through and the entire room is raining except where you are. Or you have 3D printed art, stuff by like Shane Hope and Eric von Straten, and like all this really cool, really complex stuff that you need a 3D printer to do, or online art, right? I love the Sketch Gallery of London's high tea, but I also really like their website. It's very like quirky and interactive. And then you have things like Google Arts and Culture that's doing like VR tours through museums like the Louvre, right? So like all of these have really cool aspects. But there's a big barrier of entry, and I felt like I couldn't quite jump into this space where people were doing like such complicated stuff. And I was looking for a space that was maybe a little bit more beginner and a place where I could experiment and it would be okay for me to be bad at something. And so what I found was this thing called Spark AR, hence the title of this talk. And so what Spark AR is a tool to augment or to create augmented reality experiences and sort of play and tinker in this AR space, kind of like a maker space. It's developed by Facebook, so it sits on the Facebook suite of apps. So when you go into Instagram and you see all of those filters, this is the technology it's used. It's being created with, same with Facebook. And I had originally found it because I was doing color theory coursework at the time, and I wanted to create these filters. I wanted to like go out and be able to take a photo of here I am just down the street from me at the ocean, and I wanted to be able to like create these color palettes and play with those. And I felt like I could maybe find technology that would do that. And it sought at this really cool crux where I felt like in comparison to those other things that I was too intimidated to get into, Spark AR was significantly cheaper, right? I wasn't buying 100 gallons of water and renting a room and trying to like rig up recycling cool rain room graphic stuff. It was easy, right? I wasn't teaching myself CAD or having to like work with special equipment. And it already had this huge suite of users, these millions of users using it. And so I felt like I had found something that I could play with, and I wanted to see what I could do with that, right? And so the thing is, the way I looked at it, I was new at it, but so was everyone else, right? I had found it like right in the first couple months of it being launched. And so I felt like I was the crow that had like found its shiny thing and collected it and stored it and brought it back to its nest. And I couldn't quite figure out what to do with it. And I was kind of excited by that idea, right? Like I found a cool thing, so what do I do with it? And so the next part of this story, right, is what I had done is I had sought out and recognized an opportunity, which I think is a really overarching theme of careers, right? Is if we seek opportunities and we recognize when something has fallen into our lap or we've made opportunity for ourselves, to take it upon ourselves to like get excited and go take that opportunity, right? Here, for example, like at the time I was like, I can document this, I can write a blog post or like just figure out how to do this thing and teach other people. And it shocked me that other people don't like documentation, right? So I was like, oh, I can do that. And so what I did next is probably the most like sweet part of this, right? Is I learned how to do these things, right? So I downloaded Spark AR Studio. I started tinkering. It's basically like a drag and drop interface. There's a patch editor where you're basically doing like drag and drop coding. As a caveat, I will say if you're looking for a technology to teach beginners how to code, maybe like young audiences or things like that, and it's some sort of drag and drop logic editor, this would be a really cool alternative because it has this like AR capacity. So I'd love to talk about if anyone is interested in doing that. But there's also a much more complicated side, right? So there's all kinds of Easter eggs. You can actually hack it and to code these directly with JavaScript. So if you're coming from that technical background, I figured out that I could actually do a lot more because a lot of the APIs were exposed, right? So I felt like I could learn and really like find solutions and that there was a lot of opportunity there. And so I could create all of these filters, right? Here's like a sort of like disco-y robo-electric filter I had made. And I could test them, right? So I could iterate on this design of all of these things I had created. I could learn how to do these different things. I could collect feedback. And then I could deploy them, again, just to my Instagram account, basically. And then I could share them, right? So at the time, if you go to my Instagram, it's public, and you can go to all of these filters, right? And so I could share these filters I was creating. I could see what people thought about them, how to use them, and I could just have fun with it, right? And it brought back some of that joy of what I had been missing in technology because I felt like I was getting to be artistic with these things I was creating, but I was still using those coding principles, right? I was still writing really clean classes and designing the architecture of some of these more complicated systems, right, under the hood. But at the end of the day, I could share something and it was a very tangible experience, even though it was augmented. And the coolest thing I found is that I could also measure the impact, right? So at the time, I think within a few months, I was seeing like pretty big impact where I was reaching like a couple 100,000 people using these filters. And I could track that and I could see what people were using them for. At the time, I had a blur filter that was being used during a lot of protests in the US to protect people's identities during the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I realized that even though I was creating these things for fun, there was also a use case for these to actually be helpful. And again, go back to that work with accessibility that I was doing, but I could actually find a way to feel like I was helping people, which was just, again, one of those added benefits where I was like, okay, like I created a really cool thing and it did spark joy, right? I saw this opportunity, it sparked joy, I went and did it, and I'm enjoying doing it. And I think the important thing to note is it's completely okay to stop here, right? So I found a hobby, I enjoyed it, that's enough. Like it doesn't have to go further than that. It doesn't have to be your career. I think that this is a TikTok that I'm just going to sort of narrate over what's happening. But there's this idea of monetizing passion that I think specifically has really come to light during the last couple of years. But it's this idea that if you find something you enjoy, so here this millennial finds like enjoying paint by numbers, and they suddenly like have this epiphany that they have to monetize it, because if something brings you joy, you have to monetize your passion. You have to go on Etsy and sell all of the scarves that you're knitting. And I don't necessarily think that's true, right? So I found filters, I really enjoyed them. Other people went the direction of saying, okay, I want to go sell these things. And I think that's awesome. But I don't think you have to do that to be successful or find joy, right? Again, define success how you want. That said, I want to continue with this idea that I had found this opportunity, and the next sort of bullet point I have is to reflect on those experiences, right? So I was in a position where at the time I felt like I could grow from this. I had, again, found the opportunity, sought out the opportunity. It brought me joy. And so I wanted to reflect on what about it was different than what I was currently doing in my software engineering role, because again, these are both things that I was using technology to do. But I wanted to figure out why I enjoyed this more than maybe what I was doing in my day job. And so the first thing is I really enjoyed that I was working with a new digital medium, right? I was working on the crux of something. Things were new and I was discovering how to use things. I wasn't going and looking up old documentation. I was actually the one creating the documentation or going out and figuring out how to use something that was undocumented. And I really liked that white space. I also liked that it was free, it was easy to use, and it had that global reach. And I felt like I was helping people. And I also just really enjoyed the aesthetic of it, right? So these are a collection of palette filters. Again, this all came from this color theory idea. But I just enjoyed like the visual aesthetic of it. And I also just really enjoyed that I felt like I was fostering my own creativity in a positive manner. And I was, again, using technology in that positive way, right? And I liked the diverse set of people that were using the same tool to create vastly different things. Let me make sure that's close. Okay. And the other big thing that I really liked was I liked the open source community. So if I looked at who the community was, there were about 6,000 people when I first joined, and it was up to about 60,000 a year ago. I believe it has quite blossomed since then. Again, it started with a beta of about 2,000 people when I first started. And I really enjoyed that those people were all over the world, right? So it looked like a typical developer community, except it was all happening on Facebook versus maybe like a Stack Overflow or I don't know, Slack. There's a million ways that people communicate. And I really enjoyed that I was talking with people from all over the world who were creating these super different things with the same technology. I just really enjoyed open source, and I had never really thought about open source as a career path before. And I also enjoyed what people were doing with it, right? So again, like here's a couple examples, but these are filters from South Korea, Dubai, and Spain, where there's like intense CAD modeling, or there's like really trippy South Korean graphics, or there's like putting your head on a shrimp, right? People were funny. I just enjoyed all of this stuff, right? Or like these are probably what people think of when they think of Spark AI filters, but there was all kinds of gamification where you played Tetris with your nose, or you had to figure out what gibberish the word was saying before it flipped, or trivia and all kinds of stuff. And I also felt like other people were finding uses in a social impact way, right? So people were creating built-in metro maps that you could whip out if you were lost on the subway, or during COVID, people were doing like social distancing stuff. So again, people were just like finding their own ways to be creative with it. And I really enjoyed being a part of that. And so when I was reflecting on all of this, I felt like I was in this place where I really liked creative direction in general, and I liked art, but I was stuck in tech, right? And I think stuck is the word that I want to like sort of dispel from what we're thinking of, because at the end of the day, what I was really doing was I was learning a technology, I was creating with it, I was tinkering, I was iterating, I was deploying, I was documenting what I was doing, and I was sharing it. And all of that is something that you do in pretty much any other technical role you're in, no matter the product you're working on. And so what I ended up doing was redefining what I thought of when I thought of technology. And I think this is something that everyone can do and should do. Because at the end of the day, you're no lesser of a person if you're a documentary role within technology, or if you're creating the cutting edge thing, right? And so I revisited that Venn diagram. And I looked at where I was sitting in that sort of software engineering role, where I didn't really have that passion. Again, I loved the code that I was writing. I just wanted to have more creative control over what I was doing. And I looked at things like UX and UI and these other things that maybe I hadn't specialized in, and realized that there was something called developer advocacy. And ended up going in that direction. Now, I will say, this is the point where I want to say that I feel like we need to do a better job of sharing all of the different routes you can take in tech, right? I want to dispel the idea that you start at a software engineer 3 and you go 4, 5, 6, and the biggest career choice you'll have is at some point deciding if you want to be a manager or an individual contributor, right? There's so many other routes you can go, and so many interesting people doing so many different things with it. And so I think it's a really valuable thing to look at a Venn diagram like this and say, okay, what options am I not thinking of, right? Like, I could be a professional cat owner. Now, I will say I don't see a lot of demand in that. I probably can't make a living off of that, but I'm good at it. And so just putting all of those things that you have thought about down into something like this and really thinking about that. And I think the other thing to think of is how we're sharing all of the different types of roles that are out there, right? I would love to have seen this earlier in my career, and I'm hoping I'm hitting some audiences earlier in their career, knowing that there's ways to tree off into different structures. Right? Up until 6 months ago, I wasn't on tech Twitter. I didn't know that the avocado emoji in some people's bios meant that they were a developer advocate or avocado, which I love the pun. I just wish that I had known about it earlier, right? And so I think the big thing here is to, again, redefine what tech means, especially with younger audiences. And then to realize that all we're really trying to do is find space to tell our story, right? So at the end of the day, I'd gone through this whole journey. I had sparked that passion. I had figured out what I had wanted to do. I found opportunities to do it. And I felt like I had this really cool, really unique new story. And so I wanted to find places to tell it. And that's basically exactly what I did when I went job interviewing. I told exactly this story. I said, listen, I'm a really good engineer, but I'm even more passionate about how I can be creative in engineering. And the thing is, passion projects make really great stories. So everything you've done up until this point is the best story you could possibly share, because it's what you're individually passionate about, right? It's a lot easier to share things that you care about. And I know that when I watch speakers, I have a lot more fun if they have a personal interest in what they're talking about. And passion is good, right? Like, I love making GIFs and I get to do that, kind of. I wouldn't say it's a big part of my role, but I do it and it's fun. But even more so than that, right? Like, when I got my job, I said, okay, like these AR filters helped me get this job. I can create a filter for this, right? I can make my nostrils the O's in Google and celebrate that, right? So I think realizing that having passion for what you're doing is a great way to at least personally define success. And that is basically the story that got me to where I am. So if I reflect on, again, sort of just the points that I went through to talk about how I used Spark AR to, again, spark that joy, I sort of want to boil it down into these points, right? So pursuing sparks of passion. For me, it was realizing that I was doing mostly art outside of work and realizing that that's where my passion laid, but that didn't mean that I had to leave tech behind when I went to pursue it. And then seeking out those opportunities, right? Finding new technologies that I was excited about, figuring out that there are things that I like to do, like document things or try new things and be frustrated because it's not documented and I don't know how it works and I want to figure it out. And then doing that, whether or not you can measure impact, that's great. And reflecting on those experiences, right? So realizing that what brought me joy out of that was, again, figuring out that white space, having impact, feeling like I helped maybe somebody somewhere sometime. And then redefining what that meant for my career, right? Technology doesn't have to be your career, but if we're defining a career in technology, I think that it's worthy to say that there's a lot of roles outside of the words software engineer, and those are very valuable, and I would love to see more exposure to them. And then finding space to tell them, making sure you understand your story, and then going to employers with that story is a really great way to walk yourself through sparking that joy. And so with that, I would just like to say thank you. You can find me at Twersky on everything. Please tag me if you use any of these filters, or check out Spark AR. I love to see what people are doing after these talks. And with that, thank you.